Hi everyone, I'm Pembe Coşkuner from the Department of Translation and Interpretation. Today I will be talking about the effect of social structure on the usage of language with a special attention to Anthony Burgess's novel A Clockwork Orange. Let me just share my screen with you. Yes, okay. As I mentioned before, today I'll be talking about the effect of the social structure on the usage of language from a social-linguistic point of view, with a special attention to Anthony Burgess's novel A Clockwork Orange, which was published in 1962. Now, under the framework of this study, literature review was conducted with a special attention to demonstrated topics. Firstly, the concept of language is analyzed, and this is followed by the relationship of language and society. Then we will look at language and worldview, and we will move on with the relationship between language, thought, and culture. Now, a special attention is also given to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in the study. We will analyze this with detail. And this is followed by the information about the author of the novel, Anthony Burgess. And the novel will also be analyzed, A Clockwork Orange, with a special attention to external factors such as England during the 60s, because the novel was published in the 60s, and the fictional language of the novel, which was created by the author, Nadsat, will also be analyzed. And we will also look at the concept of totalitarian government, since the government in the novel is a totalitarian one. And then we will link all of these to the effect of language. Okay? Now, let's move on. Before moving on, let's talk about the statement of the problem. I would like to clarify that. Now, the statement of the problem. Before moving on to that, let's talk about what is Nadsat. Now, the Nadsat is the fictional register or argot used by the teenagers in Anthony Burgess's novel, A Clockwork Orange. And using this as a reference point, the effect of the language usage of the teenagers in the novel will be analyzed. Now, every individual belongs to various social groups according to their gender, age, occupation, and social environment. And from a social linguistic point of view, the usage of language shows difference correlatively with these groups. Now, the youth in the novel use a fictional argot, which is a really violent language, and it is called Nadsat. We will move on to that point after these parts. Now, the research question of this study is, to what extent does the social structure in the novel has an effect on the language usage of the youth in the novel? Now, when we look at the significance of the study, there are a great amount of researchers in this field, but this study is significant in terms of focusing on Anthony Burgess's novel, A Clockwork Orange. Now, the aim of the study, as it can be understood from the heading of the study, the aim of this study is to analyze the novel titled A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, which was published in 1962, in order to review the effect of social structure, which is a totalitarian one, on the language. Okay, scope of the study is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which claims that the structure of a language influences in which one thinks and behaves. And the limitations of the study is again Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and the UK version of the novel, because the novel has two versions. One of them is UK version and the other one is the US version. And in this version, the last chapter of the novel is omitted, but I will touch upon this point while analyzing the book. Now, first of all, let's look at the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. In this hypothesis, it argues that the particular language that one speaks influences the way one thinks. Now, actually, this hypothesis has two versions. One of them is weak version, and one of them is strong version. And the strong version is also called the linguistic determinism, and it argues that one's language determines what one can think and cannot think. This is the strong version. And according to weak version, characteristics of one's languages influences the way we think to a certain extent. Now, it should be noted that this dimension, strong and weak dimension, is not related with the strength of the argumentation, but it reflects the degree of the influence. Now, let's move on to the novel. Now, the novel was written in 1962 by Anthony Burgess. And as I said before, it has two versions, the UK version, which has 7 chapters, and the US version, which has 6 chapters. And in the US version, as I mentioned before, the last chapter is omitted. However, according to the author, according to Anthony Burgess, his intentions in writing the novel were misunderstood due to the omission of the last chapter in the US version. So it is the conclusion part that reflected his ideas, and this part was omitted in the US version. Now, I want to give some information about the book. Now, Alex is the protagonist of the novel. He is a 15-year-old violent teenager who commits violent acts with his friends. And these teenagers in the novel uses a language called Natsat, which I will touch upon in the following slide. They use Natsat with their gang. Now, this is a really important point. Alex is a great fan of Beethoven, and he listens to Beethoven while committing these violent acts. On the other hand, the authorities are aware of the violent acts that the teenagers commit, but they are not able to do anything because the teenagers in the novel has the power of the streets. Until one point. At one point, Alex, the main character of our novel, is caught because he kills a woman and he wasn't able to escape. And after this incident, he was sent to jail for 2 years. And while he was in the second year of his prison years, the authorities offer Alex a treatment method. And after this treatment, authorities say that he will be, they will get rid of his violent instincts and he will be able to get out of the jail in just 2 weeks. Now, this rehabilitation program would allow him to get out of the jail, but the program, which is called Ludwiko technique, is severely violent. And in the program, Alex is forced to watch violent scenes from wars, and these violent scenes were also accompanied with the music of Beethoven. And while watching these violent scenes, he was injected with medicines that would make him feel sick. Now, at the end of the program is successful, by the way. At the end of the program, he's no longer able to commit these violent acts. And whenever he tries to do something violent or even think something violent, he feels sick due to the medicines that were given to him in the process of his treatment. And there is no turning back from this treatment. So let's summarize it. We have a violent teenager. He is caught, and the government is a totalitarian one. And in order to get out of the jail in a very quick way, the government, the authorities offer him a treatment. And after this treatment, which was really violent, he is no longer able to commit violent acts. And let's talk about the language that the teenagers use in the novel. As I said before, this language is called Natsat, and Burgess, the author himself, explains that this register is a mixture of Russian and English seasoned with rhyming slang. The name comes from the suffix Natsat, which means teen in Russian. And this is, as I already said, spoken by droogs, which is a Natsat term for friends and youth in the novel. Now, before moving on to the findings and discussions, let's talk about the methodology of the study. Now, this study is designed as a descriptive one. And as descriptive studies necessitate, it begins with a hypothesis. Now, data collection procedure includes textual analysis, and as we all know, in textual analysis, we see texts as cultural artifacts, material documentary evidence that is used to make sense. And in the process of gathering and measuring information, we use textual analysis. And in the process of this study, textual analysis paved the way for answering the stated questions and test the hypothesis. Now, in the process of data analysis, qualitative data analysis is used to classify and summarize and interpret the obtained data. Now, findings and discussions. We will discuss and analyze the future of the original review in the light of the reviewed literature in this part. Now, analyzing literary works is not merely reviewing the text, it also requires extensive analysis of the future found in the text. That's why within this framework, while analyzing the novel, first of all, we will look at the use of language in the novel, then we will analyze youth violence, Natsat, and the government in the novel. And then we will have a look at the effect of the totalitarian government on the occurrence of Natsat. Because, as I mentioned before, the government is a totalitarian one, which uses violence on the teens. And the language that teens are using, which is called Natsat, is extremely violent. And we will provide different examples from the novel in order to support these ideas. Now, the usage of language in the novel can actually be divided into two parts. First one is the usage of adults, language usage of adults, and the second one is language usage of youth, which is Natsat. Now, as you can see from the demonstrated example, Alex's dad is our main character's father. And as you can see, his speech is regular speech. It doesn't contain any words that we don't know. But when we look at our main character's speech, Alex's speech, it's really hard to understand. There are words that we do not know. And it's, as I said, extremely violent. Now, as I mentioned, our main character undergoes a treatment, and within the process of these treatment, they talk about the language that they use, and they evaluate this language a kind of linguistic rebellion. And this language, which we refer to as Natsat, as I said, is a kind of linguistic rebellion. And one of the doctors that cure Alex states that this is a bit of gypsy talk too, but most of the roots are Slav propaganda, subliminal penetration. Now, this part is also taken from the book. Now, if we were to summarize this part, we can say that the language that the youth use is extremely violent, and the adults use standard English, normal English. And as I said, from the demonstrated example, it is possible to make a distinction from who is youth and who are adults. Okay, now the transition to normal regular English from Natsat is also observed when the characters stepped into the adulthood. From the example, this is the part where Alex meets his old friend after 3 years. His friend Pete is married now, and they are 20 years old now. And his Pete, who used to talk with Natsat, talks with regular English now. And they're actually shocked with the talking style of Alex, who uses Natsat. And from the example, we can see that Pete says, I'm nearly 20, old enough to be hitched, and it's been 2 months already. You were very young and very forward, remember. And he says this to Alex. Moreover, by the end of the novel, it even seems that Alex's speech use of Natsat starts to diminish. Towards the end of the novel, he states that if I walked into the room where the fire was burning away, my hot dinner laid on the table, there I should find what I really wanted. Now, here, Natsat can be seen as the representation of teenage immaturity, while desires of Alex, who were younger and who used Natsat, were violent. The desires of the Alex who uses regular English are very naive, actually. Now, let's look at the youth violence, Natsat, and the government. Since that we observe the differences between language usage of youth and language usage of the adults, we can analyze the effect of the totalitarian government on the usage of language. Now, youth of a society reflects the situation of that society, and since the language usage of a person gives clues about their personalities, it is not that difficult to understand the social structure of the particular language. Now, here in this demonstrated example, it is possible to understand how these violent acts give joy to young people. Let's look at the final part of the paragraph. Then out comes the blood, my brothers, real beautiful. Now, this is again taken from the novel, and we can see that these violent acts give the young people joy. Now, the question is, what is the role of the government on these violent acts? At the beginning of the novel, Alex draws a rebellion picture that appears to rebel against the government. And this example demonstrates his rebellion against the government. And Alex accuses the adult world, actually, for the condition of the youth. And we can see it here. It was the adult world that could take responsibility for this with their wars and bombs and nonsense. Now, it is clear that he's accusing actually the adult world for their behaviors. Now, again, I want to look at some examples. Now, as I mentioned before, Alex undergoes a therapy rehabilitation program to get purified from his violent acts. And actually, this process of treatment is a really violent one. He explains this process as the intention to act violently is accompanied by strong feelings or physical distress. Now, as I said before, um, during this treatment, he is injected with medicines that will make him feel sick. And whenever he tries to act violent or even think violent, he gets sick due to the treatment that he got. Now, let's move on to the other example. Now we will look at the effect of the totalitarian government on the occurrence of Natsat, which was the violent language that the youth in the novel use. Now, the ruling government in the novel has entire traits of a totalitarian government. First of all, people in the novel are in a constant fear of violent crime, locked in their homes, working strictly for the benefits of the government. And these examples demonstrate these situations. And on the other hand, police terror, which is one of the important traits of totalitarian government, it can be observed in the novel. And yes, yes, I'm sorry. The first example demonstrates the police terror in the novel. As I said before, when Alex gets caught, he was beaten by the police. And first example belongs to part where Alex gets arrested. And the police states that righty right boys, we'll start off by showing him that we know the law too, but that knowing the law isn't everything. And in this part, as I said, Alex becomes the victim of violence. And second example belongs to the part where Alex completes this rehabilitation program that we talked about. At this point, the government takes away one of the basic features of being a human being, which is freedom of choice, actually, because he is no longer able to choose between good or bad. He is forced to choose good, and while being treated, he undergoes a really bad pain. And this example demonstrates his pain. Now, as it is known, the other aspect of totalitarian governments is the control of the media. Here, while Alex was reading the newspaper after his treatment, he sees a news about himself, and in the newspaper it is stated that he is now a good, law-fearing citizen. However, the news does not mention the brutal process that Alex goes through. It only talks about the outcome of the treatment. Now, we said that there is a totalitarian government in the novel, which which does really bad things to their citizens, especially to young people. Now we have violence on one hand, the violence conducted by the government, and we have the violence conducted by the young people in the novel. So we will relate this to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, as it is argued throughout the study, the totalitarian structure of the novel has an effect on the violent language usage of the young people in the novel. So, in this chapter, we will look at the examples from the novel. Now, first example actually demonstrate how violent are the youth. Just a normal night, they are wandering around the city and they are looking for someone to beat up. This is a situation actually which affects the whole society. However, precautions taken by the society, precautions taken by the government are equally violent. So they are actually trying to eliminate violence with violence. Now, this example, first example, represents the general violent behaviors of the young people in the novel, and this actually represents the fear of the adults in going out to street in nights because there are teenagers all over the streets and they're really afraid to go on the streets. Now, as we said, every aspect of the novel is violent, and as it is demonstrated here in the example, while doing the treatment, horrible Nazi images were shown to Alex, and he is forced to watch these scenes, even though he could not bear anymore. Now, in a society where violence occupies a great place, it is nearly impossible for young people to live a life free from violence. Now, this example demonstrates the joy that youth get from violent acts. As you can see, the narrative pace here is really slow, describing the violent acts in a very, very detailed way. And violence and the violent language is a part of actually Alex's character, and as it is the part of the government as well. Now, as Wolf argues, concepts that we internalize are codified in the patterns of our language, which means no one is completely free in describing the nature, but we are in a way conditioned in terms of our linguistic systems. And Worf argues that we cut nature up, organize it into concept, and ascribe significances as we do, largely because we are parties to arrangement to organize it in this way. An arrangement that holds throughout our speech community and is codified in the patterns of our language. Now, to summarize this, according to this theory, the language we use actually reflects our own reality, the world that we live in. Now, to what extent does the social structure has an effect on the language usage of the youth in the novel? Now, under the light of conducted analysis, it is observed that there is a relationship between social structure and the use of language to a certain extent. The violence that the government performs may cause the youth to internalize this behavior and reflect this by means of their language. Because according to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, concepts that we internalize are codified in our language. Now, the other aspect of the book, as we said before, the Natsat was actually the combination of English and Russian language. And the author of the book states that as the book was about brainwashing, it was appropriate that the text itself should be a brainwashing device as well. The reader should be brainwashed to learn minimal Russian, which is true. While you are reading the book, first you are forced to look at the glossary because you do not understand the meanings of the words. But as you move on reading the book, you get used to the Russian words, and you don't have the urge to look at the glossary anymore. So now this is all. I want to summarize it. Now we said that we will analyze Anthony Burgess's novel A Clockwork Orange with a special attention to the effect of language, the effect of social structure on the usage of language. Now when we look at the book, the government is a really totalitarian one, which commits violent acts on the youth. And this shows itself with the violent language usage of the youth, actually. And according to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, as we said before, we reflect our own reality. We reflect the world that we live in our speech, actually. And this justifies the study questions of this study. The totalitarian government really has an effect on the language, violent language usage of the youth. Now, this was all from me. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all have a good day.